Friends, if we know anything from studying the Gospels, it is that they don't always agree on the specifics. And that's no different when we're reading the passion narratives from the Gospels. Mark describes the initial events at Jesus' crucifixion this way. He says the soldiers, brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha. 5 verses later, he announces, and with Jesus they crucified 2 bandits, one on his right and one on his left. John records the same information in different words, saying, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. Luke, who was likely following Mark and possibly Matthew, makes 2 major editorial changes regarding the men crucified with Jesus. First, in Luke chapter 23, verse 33, like John, he connects the name of the location to the description of the 3 condemned to death. When they came to the place that is called the skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Second, only Luke presents a short interchange among the 3 victims. Luke says this: one of the criminals were hanged there, kept deriding, and in the Greek the word is actually blaspheming him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah?" The Greek word there is Christos. "Save yourself and us." But the other one rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." With these scenes, the gospel writers challenge us to address several topics that many of us, myself included, would rather not engage, including the anonymity of so many imprisoned and executed people in this country and around the world, the names we forget and the names we never know, the ongoing practices of torture and capital punishment, the horrible things that we say when we are desperate and in pain, and the fear that some of us have of dying, especially if we have not rectified and cannot rectify the harm we've done to others. To quote New Testament professor A.J. Levine, she says, "Anyone who says biblical studies is easy or that all we need to do is love, you're living in a fantasy world." The Bible forces us to ask the hard questions, and it will not let us avert our eyes from sin and guilt. When we pick up the Bible's challenge, we come closer to the group Jesus described when he said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled," in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. In the Passion narrative, it is ironically and sadly a stranger who defends Jesus in his final hours, not a disciple. And to put it more succinctly, Jesus' defender is a criminal, or in the Greek, it's actually more accurate to translate it as an evildoer. And perhaps my favorite passage from Luke's telling of the story is the passage when the evildoer being crucified next to him says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." You may remember that at different times throughout Lent, we've used a short chorus in worship from the Taizé community in France that utilizes this exact text. But before we get to the where and when of the kingdom, we need to take some time for the what of being remembered. The call to remember is not just a plea for an afterlife marked by freedom rather than imprisonment, or in this case, execution. A call to remember is to make sure we do not treat our fellow human beings like numbers on a uniform or at a roll call, but that we treat them as individuals. A call to remember is to think about justice in sentencing and how prisons house and feed individuals and what the justice system can do to help in rehabilitation, in attending to the concerns of the victims and their families, and also to the families of perpetrators. Memory is especially important in cases of death, and all three of these men are dying. They force the question of memory back to us, and whether we're mostly saint or mostly sinner, and we're actually all a combination of both, we may wonder, how will I be remembered? Or even, who will remember me? We see in one of the Beatitudes, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. That's Matthew chapter 5, verse 4. And we know that memory can be important in the mourning process. Here at the cross in Luke, the subject shifts, however. The dying man knows that the cross is not the end of the story. And for Jesus to remember him, Jesus must have a mind and a heart that can remember. The end, therefore, cannot be for Jesus oblivion. We tend to think of remembering those who have died so that we are the ones doing the remembering. But Luke allows us a different view. What would it mean to think about those who have died remembering us? Or to put the question in theological language, what might it mean to know that God remembers us? That we are not forgotten, that we matter. The stories of these men executed with Jesus continue on. We read about them in the apocryphal texts, such as the Gospel of Nicodemus from the 4th century and in other writings. But even in these texts, we don't know their crimes. And this brings us to a point of uncomfortableness. For what crimes would we want people executed? What background stories or mitigating circumstances might make a difference in the sentencing? And finally, maybe even more disconcerting, we don't know who their victims were, what they lost, or what they suffered. My brother, who is an assistant district attorney in East Tennessee, is always quick to remind me about the rights of victims, particularly when I'm advocating for the rights of those who are incarcerated. And he's right. What is our responsibility to the victims? And what would the victims of these two men think as they watched them dying on that hill next to Jesus those many years ago? Friends, I leave you with those questions as we continue in our own journey to the cross this week.